Max Verstappen's form this season has been mighty. Until Monaco, Verstappen had won every race he had finished in 2022, building on a consistent P1 or P2 finish streak stretching all the way back to Hungary last year. The consistency is unparalleled on the F1 grid, but in the early days of his career, Verstappen was not quite so consistent, and he made many mistakes. So how did Verstappen get so consistent in Formula 1? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Verstappen's form has been incredible to watch over the last couple of years. It's a clear sign of Verstappen's progression ever since he joined the Formula 1 grid when he was just 17 years old. So here's how he got just so consistent in this sport and has arguably become the strongest and most consistent driver on the grid. And as always, if you enjoy the video, then make sure you consider subscribing. YouTube's telling me that just 20% of the people who watched my videos in May were subscribed to the channel, and I'm aiming for 50,000 subscribers by the mid-season break, so if you haven't already done so and want to help, please consider subscribing. Thanks. Mistakes from Inexperience. Unless the rules change, Verstappen will be the youngest F1 driver ever, having joined the sport at the age of just 17. His career before joining Formula 1 was short but impressive, as he achieved some great results in Formula 3, competing with drivers significantly older than him. And it was these performances that meant that Red Bull were willing to give him an opportunity at such a young age to get himself onto the F1 grid. Verstappen's signature was in high demand, with Mercedes, Ferrari and Lotus all reportedly offering him the chance to join their driver academies. But it was Red Bull that gave him the chance to get into an F1 seat sooner with Toro Rosso, so that's the option he took. In Verstappen's first season in Formula 1, he was up against a fellow rookie driver, Carlos Sainz. A driver pairing that if still together today would be up there as one of, if not the strongest in the sport. That 2015 season for Verstappen was remarkable. He scored 49 points over 19 rounds with 10 point-scoring finishes. His fourth place finish in the Hungarian Grand Prix was the team's best result since 2008. In terms of his performance on track, Verstappen was incredible to watch. He had a fearless approach with some notable moments through the year, including that awesome overtake on Felipe Nasr around Blanchimont at Spa, and some excellent moves on Marcus Ericsson and Sergio Perez in Shanghai. But whilst many of the overtakes were strokes of genius, there was one mistake that did cost Verstappen at Monaco, where he hit the back of Grosjean into turn 1, and it was a mistake that landed him a 5-place grid penalty for the next round. So overall, it was a strong debut season, if a bit hampered by reliability issues and some minor mistakes, but considering his age, it was really impressive. 2016 was the year when Max progressed his career from an impressive rookie to an established competitor in the sport. After just 4 rounds, he got his promotion to Red Bull, replacing Daniel Kvyat, and he immediately made his mark as he put a tremendous drive in Spain to win his first race with them. Sure, he benefited from the 2 Mercedes drivers coming together ahead of him, but it was a composed drive fending off Kimi Raikkonen in those closing stages, and I think he showed what he was capable of. But there were mistakes as well. His performance in Monaco at the next race weekend was poor, as he hit the wall in FP3, again in Q1, and then in the race as well, in a weekend to forget for the Dutchman. Similarly, in Belgium, Verstappen had another disappointing weekend, with almost desperate driving at times as he got away from the line poorly and lost positions at the start, only to give Kimi Raikkonen no choice but to close the door as Verstappen went for a gap that simply wasn't there. On top of that, there were 2 further incidents with the Ferrari driver, as he moved across on him down the Kemmel Straight and pushed him off the track at the subsequent chicane. These weren't the only incidents over that race weekend at Spa, and it was a sign of fearlessness and perhaps the beginning of a mentality of not willing to give an inch. I think it was incidents like these that meant drivers were starting to be fearful of Verstappen's racecraft, as he pushed the limits of what was acceptable racing. Although I would also argue that his performances, such as his race in Brazil in the wet conditions that season, was one of the finest that he put in his career so far, as he dropped as low as P16 before recovering back to P3 in a drive that showed his immense talent and ability in the wet conditions, finding grip on parts of the circuit that even seasoned F1 drivers dared not go near. The 2016 season was a great improvement, and there was no doubt that Verstappen was still an incredibly talented driver, and he was still an improving talent at that, but he was making mistakes that were ultimately coming from being a teenager still learning his craft in the top tier of motorsport, something that many other drivers do during many seasons in junior formula. And this is where the consistency comes into question. As for every excellent performance, there were silly mistakes that cost him. 2017 was a new opportunity for Verstappen to start to iron out these mistakes, and it was this year that I would argue the perceptions of his career were starting to change. Traditionally, 3 years into a driver's career in Formula 1, they would likely be in their early 20s. But at the time, Verstappen was still a teenager, and so I feel like his age was almost forgotten to an extent, as he was such a staple of the grid by that stage already, and had been given an opportunity at the top team so early in his career. But Verstappen's 2017 season was again a year of highs and lows. In qualifying, an area where Verstappen had been significantly behind Ricciardo the previous season, the Dutchman was excellent and beat him 13-7 over the year, a real sign of improvement. But also in 2017, Max had some reliability challenges, with 7 retirements in 14 rounds, and 4 of these DNFs were due to mechanical issues, with the other 3 being caused by first lap incidents. Now granted, not all of these 3 first lap clashes were Verstappen's fault, but it was another 3 incidents in a season where the team needed consistency at the races where the car was reliable. So in Verstappen's first 3 seasons in Formula 1, he'd proven that he was capable of achieving some awesome results. He was obviously still learning and improving as he went year on year as well. But fundamentally, Verstappen had a reputation for silly mistakes, which was perhaps harsh considering his age. The low points. Going into 2018 and Verstappen's 4th season in Formula 1, it's hard to believe that he was still just so young. And arguably this season was his worst when it came to his consistency and errors. The Chinese Grand Prix saw a desperate move from the Dutchman as he went flying into the hairpin turn 14, taking out Sebastian Vettel in the process, and for which he received 2 penalty points on his licence. Up to that point, Verstappen had a rough start to the 2 races of the season already, with a retirement and a 6th place finish in Australia. So perhaps this difficult start had left him in a position where he thought he had to go for this dive bomb move on Vettel. At the very next race though, you could argue that Verstappen didn't learn from his mistake, as he hit his lowest point during his time at Red Bull. Verstappen collided with his teammate, Daniel Ricciardo, as the pair battled for 4th position in Azerbaijan. In that incident, Verstappen made a late move in the braking zone, which subsequently meant Ricciardo hit the back of Verstappen's Red Bull and left both drivers out of the Grand Prix. The FIA and the team put the blame on both drivers, but it's got to be said that the move was reminiscent of the one that Max pulled on the hangar straight against Kimi Raikkonen back in 2016, where he was making late moves to defend from faster cars behind him along one of the longest straights on the calendar. On this occasion, it left both drivers out of the race, and both needed to take some responsibility for that. The next 2018 mistake came from Monaco, where Verstappen had a car that was capable of winning the race. Given the disappointing start to the year for both Verstappen and Red Bull, it was crucial that the team would take this opportunity to maximise their haul of points over that weekend. And yet, in FP3, Verstappen made an error that put him in the barrier, meaning he was unable to compete in qualifying at all, so he started last. It was another Monaco error at a track where qualifying is more important than the race, and it was another costly mistake for Verstappen. In the race he did well to recover to 9th, but by that point the damage was done and his teammate won that weekend. One point that was starting to emerge in 2018 was Verstappen's standoffish nature towards the media. After several questions about these crashes, he told the media in a press conference, "I think if I get any more questions, I'll headbutt someone." Now I completely sympathise with Verstappen here. He was under a lot of pressure, and there were even some typical media rumours about him potentially being demoted back to Toro Rosso. But regardless, I don't think these kinds of comments reflected particularly well on Verstappen. And in particular, it didn't look good at all after the Brazilian Grand Prix later in the season, where the Dutchman was on for a victory but was spun around by Esteban Ocon as the French driver unlapped himself. It was an error for Verstappen not to give him the space, and sure, it was an unusual situation to be in with a lapped car being faster than the leader, but the outcome was Verstappen dropping to P2 and subsequently confronting and grabbing the Force India driver as he went to be weighed after the race. There were some real positives of Verstappen through the year, and he certainly improved along with the Red Bull car across the season. In particular, his victory in Austria was a sign of his strengths, but overall, I think the driver learned lessons from his 2018 season as he made so many errors and had so many crashes and incidents throughout that year. The only way was up. The consistency improvements. There was a new challenge for Verstappen in 2019 as Daniel Ricciardo left the Red Bull team and Pierre Gasly came in to replace him. Over his previous 3 years, there were both moments of brilliance but also errors, as we've seen so far in this video. But now, after 3 years of competing with Ricciardo for the top spot in the team, it was Verstappen that was the number one driver that Red Bull were backing. It was this that perhaps enabled Verstappen to take a step forwards in his performance, but his Red Bull car was now Honda powered, and he was in a position where he had limited opportunities to get to the podium. Particularly in the first half of the year, Verstappen was incredibly consistent, finishing 3rd or 4th in 7 of the opening 8 rounds, competing with the Ferraris and putting pressure on those drivers that had the second fastest car that season. And that other round where he didn't finish in the top 4 was Canada, where he still finished 5th. It was the beginning of a change in mentality for Verstappen as he became the de facto lead driver for the team and had really stepped up into that role. You could also argue that after 3 years with the team, Red Bull had designed a car that was suited to Verstappen's driving style, with a strong front end. This was something that both of Verstappen's teammates in 2019 commented on, and then subsequently Sergio Perez echoed those thoughts once he joined the team later down the line. So this will likely have created an environment where Verstappen could thrive, and as such, the mistakes seem to be going at the same time. The second half of Verstappen's season saw him move from fighting for 3rd or 4th to competing for race wins and podiums at most Grand Prix. His wins in Austria and Germany in the middle of the season were excellent, with the German Grand Prix in particular being contested in the wet conditions at Hockenheim. It was a sign that the Red Bull team were improving their car through the year, which is something that the team are well known for. The season wasn't faultless though, with his crash into Turn 1 at Belgium being remarkably similar to the one from 2 years before, and probably more on Verstappen than Raikkonen. But regardless of this, the number of errors throughout the year was certainly fewer, and Verstappen was starting to prove himself as able to compete with the top drivers in the sport. And he was rewarded for this, as he came 3rd in the Drivers' Championship and was ahead of both Ferraris despite being in a slower car over the year. The following season showed similar improvements for Verstappen as he continued to dominate as the lead driver in a team that was fully backing the Dutch driver throughout 2020. And in 2020, Verstappen suffered from some severe reliability issues and actually completed the fewest laps of anyone across the year. Despite this, he was just 9 points behind Bottas and kept hold of 3rd in the championship. So, from the moment that Daniel Ricciardo left the team and Verstappen became the number one driver, he's been on top form. His performances and consistency resulted in him winning his first World Championship in 2021. There remain questions over his wheel-to-wheel racing at times, but once this driver is comfortable with his car, he can be unstoppable. In 2022, Verstappen has once again been incredibly consistent, with his performance in Monaco being the only blemish on his record that was within his control, and even that was potentially not fully in his control, given he was unable to complete his final qualifying lap. Max Verstappen has been one of the most consistent drivers for several years now, and the core reason for this, in my opinion, is his confidence. He's backed by his team and is so confident in himself and the team around him. It should put him in a position to win for many years to come. If you want to learn about another driver who's found a new boost in confidence, make sure to watch this video next.